Okay, so guys, everyone, welcome to today's section. We're starting already. So Barry is a very senior technical writer. She has been in the space for over 10 years now. And after transitioning from normal technical writing, okay, not normal anyway, and she ventured into the blockchain space. So she's vast in a lot of aspects of technical writing, a lot of areas and the categories in technical writing. And today she's going to be teaching us. Okay, actually, Barry was a tutor, a mentor also in the cohort one session of the technical writing mentorship program. And this year we are privileged to also have her join us and take us on another section. So Barry is going to be teaching us about writing style guides. I hope you're all prepared with your writing materials and your questions. You can use the chat platform like we earlier discussed to drop questions and ask her anything you'd have to ask her while she's talking. So that's it for now. Barry might want to share other introductions. So, hi, Barry. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Blessing. Thank you, Wisdom, who I had the pleasure to interview multiple times at my last job. And you're so kind, Blessing, to say over 10 years. I must admit it's over 30 years. So when I
Wow.
started yeah, when I started doing technical writing, it wasn't considered a career or a profession. I went to university for public relations and graduated with a Bachelor of Science and public relations with a minor in speech communication. And I realized writing was something I enjoyed. So I worked in the newspaper industry for a while, and then I realized I can't afford to do this. So I got a job working in publishing, and then I transitioned to being able to write the instructions on how to use the publishing software for newspapers. And at the time, there wasn't really degree programs in technical writing, and there weren't really job titles called technical writing, but I knew how to uncomplicate complex information and to provide the steps for how people write. So, Blessing, when you said, oh, normal technical writing, but there is no normal in technical writing. There's traditional tech has been coined now Web 2. And so Web 3 is a coined term that often refers to blockchain. So I have been working in blockchain for more than 2 years, and I separated from my project back in the end of November. And it took me a few months to find the next great project, but I start a week from Monday. So stay tuned for exciting new information on great new blockchain docs to come. Now, one of the tools that I used during my search, I will share with you here, and it's called a link tree. And the link tree is a way that you can share a collection of links. And this will be a great way for us to provide you with links to all of the style guides that I like. But often when you apply for a technical writing job, people will say, well, what's the link to your portfolio? Well, what's the link to this? And what's the link to that? And a link tree is a free tool that allows you to provide a visual collection of links. So my link tree, you can find out a lot about me and my LinkedIn, and feel free to follow me or connect with me, whatever you would like. But also what I'm working on is my GitHub. And in this GitHub, you'll notice there's multiple repositories, but the README here is a way that you can provide a personal landing page that might be of interest, especially if you want to do open source. And then you can see here, always strive to improve products, share widely, like this handy collection of online style guides. And then it just gives my little bit of personality that people know, oh, this is who I would be working with. And then in the repositories, there's one called TechCom, and then you could go to the style guide collection, which is what we'll be talking about today. But also you could get to the same thing by, I collect TechCom style guides. So you'll see it goes to the same style guide collection here. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I loved it when you said we're going to talk about writing style guides, but actually the focus should not be on writing a style guide. I don't think we should have to. I think we should be able to use the existing style guides and instead just document exceptions. So what is a style guide? That's the biggest question, right? So when you think about a style guide, it really is just when there's more than one way to do something, a decision has been made on how to do it. So I really have to stress that we don't have to remember everything. Let me make my screen bigger. We don't have to remember everything. We just have to remember where to look for the answers. So the way I do that is I document style guides, and I just make sure that I know where to find a set of standards for writing and designing content. And the biggest takeaway for style guides is it helps you have a consistent style, voice, tone, and it'll contain all kinds of uses and best practices and punctuation guidelines, even text formatting, whatever it is. So the style guide is really just a canonical set of guidelines that the people that you're writing content for, whatever is the project, the team, the product, your blog post, whatever content that you would like to have a set of guidelines for, you can create consistency. So you have the right consistency. And they have a great resource for the Write the Docs Learning Resources Documentation Style Guides. So the conference is coming up soon in Portland. I don't know if you all are familiar with the Write the Docs, but I encourage you to find a community in this global set of people who care about documentation, and all of their content here on the website is open source. You can contribute or feel free to use it. But at the last conference, we all decided we would improve this particular resource on style guides. And we worked as a team to come up with the accessibility guidelines on a separate page, reducing bias. And then should you write your own style guide? If you want to, here's how to. The different kinds of style guides, it has all the same links that I love, because why should we reinvent the wheel? And then when you have enterprise software style guides, for me, I write developer documentation. So I rely mostly on the Google developer documentation style guide. So this set of style guides is very similar to mine because we all contributed and we built that page together. And you could join us on the Write the Docs and my daily go-to reference. I see somebody has a question. Thank you for raising your hand. Blessing, did you want to moderate the questions and invite them to ask?
Yeah, sure. They can ask questions.
Okay. What's your question? I didn't see the name came quickly.
Hi, good evening. I was going to ask, can we also contribute to Write the Docs?
Yes, absolutely. The Write the Docs is my go-to community. So if you go to this Write the Docs, it's a global community, and they have an open source website that you can contribute any kind of updates to the pages, and it goes through the regular pull request process. So yeah, in fact, today, one aspect of the Write the Docs was search engine optimization. So it's so nice that this Write the Docs right here, we have, let's see, this threads. This is a different thread. So there was a general question on SEO. There was a really nice set of questions here on, has anybody ever taken an SEO course? And what happened today wasn't exactly related to style guides, but it answers your question on this SEO course. And you could see a lot of people, this question was asked just on Wednesday, today's Friday, and a lot of people talk about, wow, yeah, look at this. This is how we did search engine optimization. And so a lot of people contributed. And at the end, you know what happened, Erebor? Somebody said, wow, there's so much great things. Somebody named Daryl did this. He did a pull request. And guess what? Now we have a brand new page on Write the Docs for SEO. So this is an example of a community coming together this is valuable information. Oh, let's put it on the website that everybody can find it later. So this is pretty great. So if that answers your question, you're more about how you can contribute, but it is a way to contribute to the website for the resources. Does that answer your question, Iribor?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I thought that was such a great response. Somebody said, this is great. I want to remember it. So you know how they remembered it? They just talked all about, you all might find this interesting. And the too long didn't read answer for search engine optimization is write good documentation, and writing the right headlines and being able to write the content for the intended audience is the best quick answer for the documentation guidelines for having good SEO. So for myself, I really like to collect style guides for reference, and I'd like to see how other organizations do style guides. I try very hard not to write a style guide. We had one at a team of professional doc writers at a database company, and it was a lot of work to maintain and update the style guide because things change as you go. So what I like to use is my Google Developer Documentation Style Guide, and I'll show you why I like this one so well. So I'll make my screen large so we have it. You can always vote on pages. I like this thing. But the highlights of this Developer Documentation Style Guide that Google writes for its own writers to write about products applies to many of us. But what I like is it just talks about how it is an overview of the most important points. And often when I get asked when I start a new job, which starts a week from Monday, I'm very excited, is what is the tone? What is the content and tone of voice? And so they provide information about that. How do you have a tone of voice? One of the most frequently occurring changes that I ask other writers to make, usually it's developers write their own docs, and I come along and I help make the content more consistent and hopefully without too much process could get it to be in there. But one of the things that I like to do is take away phrases like please note and at this time, because the word currently, you're reading it, that means now. We don't need to have please note. Not to use ableist language. What do we mean by ableist language? You want to be friendly, but you might come in there, so you don't want to do sanity check. You might have just talked about completeness and clarity instead. Instead of crazy, you might use a a term that doesn't get misinterpreted. And so instead of using the word cripples, you could use the word slows down. Things you don't think about until you actually see them and you wonder to yourself, oh, why does this look wrong for me? And gender is a big topic, especially now when we talk about pronouns. We don't want to use man hours. You want to use person hours. So these are all things that people have thought about before that we don't have to reinvent. We just have to know how to look them up. So when you think about conversational and friendly, it's a bigger topic than you originally think. Don't pre-announce anything. When you're talking about pre-announcing, it's like, oh, this is going to be the greatest new feature, and you don't want to do that. The short answer is don't document future features in products. And so one of my writing assignments for my trial project to get my new job was to correct some documentation for them. And the biggest change I made was timeless documentation. And what do we mean by timeless? We don't want to use now, new, currently. These are things that we write all the time because it's how we speak, but we just don't know how to do that. But it gives us really good guidance on how you can find words like, oh, at present, as of this writing, and it sneaks in all the time. But in technical documentation, if we can have timeless documentation, it's really very effective. And that was my biggest change to the topics that I was submitting my writing style for. And then when I made those changes, I was able to provide a link to this timeless documentation. So I would not be giving my changes as a personal opinion, but more as an industry standard. And here's some guidelines on how I did that. So I like this Google documentation style guide because it gives me a lot of things you don't know. Like descriptive link text is something that is a good opportunity to do better all the time. One of the things you want to do is to make the link text actually match the target of where the link is going. Oftentimes we'll see click on this link. Well, instead of using this link, you can use descriptive link text, and how you can write link text. Gives you some ways that you could style it, but actually you want to write unique descriptive link text that makes sense without the surrounding text. So you don't want to use this document, this article, or click here. We see that every day. I see it every day. So it's nice when you want to have descriptive link text and you provide some examples of how that works, then you can go ahead and provide a link to this page on this style guide. And then the person who originally made that link text, it's a non-confrontational way to provide feedback because that is our style guide. So these are some of the pages that I use all the time. When you're just looking in the descriptive link text, writing accessibly, writing for a global audience. One of the global audience things that I come across all the time are general things. Like you want to use present tense. That was another one of the changes I made in my trial project for my new job. Often the developers will want to use future tense. When you do this, this will happen. But you can just use present tense all the time. And what do we mean about present tense? Here, let me close some of our other pages. You want to be able to send a query and the sender serves an acknowledgement. But instead, often we will encounter this will happen. So sometimes it's unavoidable, but here are some really basic, very general things. And the key point is don't use the word will. If you have to use the word will, just take a minute and think about it. Why do we want to use it? The biggest change is deciding who the audience is. For me, I write developer documentation, and it's very clear if somebody's reading the product documentation that the audience is a developer. So in that case, you could use the word you. But when we have tutorials, often people like to write the tutorials. Okay, now we're going to build the blockchain. But now we're not doing it, they're doing it. So we can just say you. So second person and first person, it's something that comes up very frequently in content, especially tutorials. So in general, you want to use the second person, which just means the word you. And the first person, it's not I'm doing it or we're doing it. And why do we want to do that? To make sure that we adjust our content to that user. And this is something that is easy to change. And then when you need to know why am I making that change, it's because it's the best thing to do. You have a style guide, and this is here. The active voice, that's another real favorite of mine. So this highlights page is the best page. So for those of you following along in the chat, if you just save this one link, your hour today will be a great investment. When you talk about the active voice, the main thing is you make clear who's performing the action. You want to make sure you know who the active voice is. So you want to make sure the grammatical subject of the sentence is the person or thing performing the action. So all of this is just very easy to do. It gives you recommended and to de-emphasize how you do it. And this is very easy. It's just the active voice. So in general, use the active voice. And it's something that probably comes naturally and you encounter content and you want to fix it. Today, I spent some time looking up to put the conditions before the instructions. And I'm like, oh, hold on. I opened up the wrong thing. Oh, it's here. Sentence structure. So often you want to say, see this for more information in the Google decision for their writers. is to put the conditions first. To do this, see that. To do this, do that. And so just the choice they made, and that's how they provide consistency for theirs. So these are just some examples of the highlights. One of the things that I love are being consistent with headings. So the headings, Google likes to use sentence case, and however the project, the product, the blog, whatever it is that you're writing, capitalizing consistency or consistently in the titles and the headings is very important. So for Google, they like to use sentence case. In the new job that I'm joining, they like to use title case and the topic title and sentence case other places. So then when you have references to them, then you want to make sure it's the same. But all of these are just things that have been decided in advance. And how do you capitalize it? I notice sometimes when I look at somebody's LinkedIn and they have a description, if they have inconsistent capitalization, even in their headline of their LinkedIn, I always wonder if I should ask them if they want my feedback. But unless someone asks, I don't. But if you would like me to look at your LinkedIn, please feel free to send me a message. And I would be happy to do that. Often LinkedIn is the first face that we put forward as professional technical writers. Numbered list for sequence, bullet list, description list, all something that I do all the time is look at serial commas. A serial comma is when you provide the comma before the word and. It's use commas to separate items in a series and use commas to separate certain kind of clauses. But the serial comma is the most important thing. This is the serial comma right here, where you see before the word and. Because otherwise, if you don't have a comma here, that regions and multi-regions are considered one item. In fact, there's a really famous legal case arguing in favor of the serial comma. Sometimes it's called the Oxford comma, sometimes it's called the Harvard comma, but I could talk about serial commas all day long. It's really, I think, great way to make sure that the list is separates each item. So when I provide feedback to that, I use the GitHub inline commenting feature in a pull request, and I could go to this page, I could get the link, and I could provide it to the author of the content so they know that, oh yeah, this is the thing, and then you do it consistently. So I really am in favor of the serial comma. I could just go with commas all day long. And then sometimes it has recommendation for unambiguous date formatting. Because we are a global world, the United States, we like to put month, day, year. And then in European states, they put day, month, year. But wouldn't it be better if we just had a way to be unambiguous in the way that we express time and in the way that we express dates? And in fact, I like to use a UTC and a GMT in addition to a time zone when I post. In Wisdom, thank you for putting the time zone on your posts about today's event. But it is nice to have a time zone and then to also have how that works in the world. So in case a person doesn't know, how many hours away from my current time is Pacific time. But to use something unambiguous is so important. And then if you have the dates in a sentence and partial dates, and if you're expressing them together, how does it work? And often I have to look up whether there's a space in between the hour and the AM or the PM. And my preference is to run it all together when I write, and I have to stop and look. And where do I look for that? I look here in the Google Developer Style Guide. Now, one of the things I use the most when I'm here is a word list. Just today, I was explaining to my mom, talking about that session today. She said, "What's a style guide?" And I said, "Oh, well, often I have to look up a word. And the word that I look up often is the word please. And I want to be able to provide the people whose content that I'm reviewing or writing, and they want to include the word please. Like, no, we don't need to include the word please in most cases. Sometimes if you're writing an error message or you're writing troubleshooting documentation, it might be appropriate to use please, but 99% of the time, You only want to do it when you ask for permission or forgiveness. So don't use please. So you don't need to use please. So like here, if the issue persists, we're asking forgiveness. So in that situation, it's good. But in all other cases, we don't need to use please. Often you'll see in documentation, well, when you do this, then you're finished. Now, please do the next step. No, they're going to do it anyway. We don't need to tell the user please. Today I was looking up how another word was spelled. And so often I will just come here to the style guide and I'll go to the word list and I'll say, oh, what does this mean? We don't want to use older. But one of the things that we don't want to do now is we don't want to use non-inclusive language. If you come across the word white list, then you can go to the Google word list. Then I like to go to the W page. And let's say I'm going to look up the word like blacklist, or blacklist. And we don't want to use it, even if they have it in the error messages or on the user interface of a product. You can provide feedback to the people who are coding the product and doing the building not to use those terms. They're just legacy terms and there's better words for them now. We don't want to use blacklist. We want to use block list or exclude list. I like deny list or gray list even. But for the noun white list, you can just have an allow list, trust list, and I like safe list. But whatever it is, you might actually choose one of those and agree as a team or even as a company what words that you're most familiar with. And if you wonder about a word, you can look it up in the word list. So for me, those are the highlights of what I like about the Google Developer Documentation Style Guide. And you can look up so many things here. And it's funny because some of my colleagues throughout my technical writing, and especially in the Write the Docs, we're not using the Google Developer Documentation Style Guide because they're not writing for developers. So maybe they use the Microsoft Writing Style Guide, which is the one that I grew up with. So in all of my first jobs, Google didn't have a developer documentation style guide, but there was always the Microsoft Writing Style Guide. And at the beginning of my career, we only had paper copies. So we would buy the book and we would look at it, and then you find the guides here. They also have a word list. So let's see what they say about please if we decide to look in there. So do they have please? Oh, look, they have an entry for please. Thank you, Peter, for your question. And this one also says please, and it has the same advice. Only if the customer, they use the word customer, not user, to do something inconvenient or application. But this is a very popular style guide and is mentioned by most people as their primary. So Peter, thank you for raising your hand. What's your question? And Wisdom, are you managing the queue?
Hi, Peter, are you there?
Hello, Peter, you can ask your questions now.
And you can type your questions if you'd like to type them.
I think so. Barrie, please, you can continue.
Okay. And so the Microsoft Style Guide turns out to be a very popular resource for how you want to use the guidance that they choose. And see, they also have principles for voice and principles, warm and relaxed, crisp and clear. So they have a different audience because Microsoft is not just developers, it's anybody who uses the Microsoft technology. So I really do like both of those style guides. I could get most of my questions answered in the developer style guide. And so all of this talks about that. And it's just really interesting, you know, like what keywords do we use? What kind of links and backlinks do we have? But people have already thought about all of these questions. So when you use a style guide, I don't think we need to sit and read it. I think we just need to bookmark it. And when we come across content that we want to improve and we have a question, the best thing to do is to know how to do those questions and how to actually search for the answer. So for instance, numbers. How do we write numbers? Most of us know that we spell out the number until we get to the number 10. And then we could use numerals instead of spelling it out. But when we talk about numbers followed by units of time, that's one thing. And then if one item uses a numeral, then you use numerals for all the other items, even if it's a number that is fewer than 10. So I'm like, sometimes I don't remember all of that. Or maybe it doesn't make sense to have a numeral before a description of something that modifies the word article. So these are just great examples. I use the style that a lot when I look up units of measure. If I'm talking about gigabytes or terabytes and you have a number and then you don't remember how you can, do I put a space between that number or do I put a space? Not, but I like to just come to a trusted source and just make sure that I remember how that is. So let's say that we talked about, can we look up units of measure? Units of measure. So this is something that I don't need to remember. I could just look it up, and I look it up a lot. For this, they put a space in between the unit of measure and the numeral, and especially for the unit of measure when it comes to hardware. That's something that I really always need to just confirm by looking at the style guide. And then what is the abbreviation for that unit of measure? And for Microsoft, they use a lowercase cm. And let's see what they do for, let's see if they have gigabytes in here. This maybe hasn't been as updated as much, but now it should be gigabytes and terabytes, and their example should be bigger. And they talk about how to spell out gigahertz. But you can see, how do you even describe the characters on a keyboard? So for instance, you don't want to use an ampersand in place of the word and. That's another popular edit that I frequently make to other people's writings. And a lot of times people want to call the braces, they want to call them curly brackets. No, they're called, the correct term for this character is braces. These are square brackets, but you don't need to call them square brackets because there's not a square bracket. And is somebody having a problem with the audio?
Yeah, people having problems with the audio, but I think it's their network, and there seems to be like a fluctuation going on.
Okay, let me turn off my camera and maybe this will help. Is that better?
I think so. Barry, you have some questions also in the chat section.
Okay, in the chat system. What if I am not writing for Google or Microsoft? That's for me too, Susan. I don't write for Google and I don't write for Microsoft. I just use those as trusted resources. I use the Google Developer Documentation Style Guide when I am writing documentation for developers who use technology. Microsoft Style Guide is good for anybody writing about any product. And if you have a blog, you should pick a style guide and just use it for consistency. Then if you write about certain tools, then you would just make a word list. Even a word list is something that's really very useful to do as a word list. So let me show you what I mean by that. And you can make a word list for your blog if you write about certain things. So if I go to my GitHub and I look at my repositories, some of my samples, like for instance, if I want to look at blockchain, I write glossaries. That's something that is another topic probably. Then you look at a word list. So this is a word list that helps me remember how I use it. So Susan, for your blog, if you just want to be consistent for your blog, you just might make a word list for the things that you write about. So for me, I know that it's backward compatible. There's no S in backwards. And we could look that up in the Google Documentation Style Guide, and you could look it up in the Microsoft Style Guide. So let's say that we're wondering about that. So we want to look up in the backward, right here, backward compatible. See, it is not backwards compatible. But maybe it comes up every now and then, but maybe that's something that other people in the company are always doing some different ways. So I make a word list. So that's something that you could do. for your blog and for whatever your topic is, but just the things that you want to have on a comment. But yeah, Chisholm, thank you for letting me know the sound is fluctuating. And then I see Monachi has a question. What style guide do you recommend out of all three that you mentioned? It depends on the audience. So I like the Google because I write for developers. But if you want to think about the Microsoft style guide, you could just Google it. If you come up here and you Google Microsoft style guide, even without a bookmark, you're like, oh yeah, look, here it is. And it gives you all kinds of great ways to think about it. How do you write about money? You know, how do you write about specific money amounts? And how do you use the euro? And then now you don't need to have the word euros with an S. So whatever the situation is that you're working on, find a resource that works well. And if you write content for somebody else, ask them if they have a style guide and whatever kind of guidelines they have. But there's all kinds of interesting things. One that comes up a lot when you're talking about names, it's very different in the United States, ways that we talk about names, the global names. Maybe here we like to talk about first name and last name, but do people all over the world call it that? We're not sure. So maybe you make sure that the user interface has the same fields as the documentation. And then instead of just state for the United States, you could use state or province. I noticed that in a section that I did it. Maybe everyone but Barrie should turn the video off. Do you guys want me to like restart? Would that be helpful? Are you hearing me now? Okay.
Yeah, clearly better.
Okay, good. Yeah, you guys call me out on it. I'm open for all kinds of feedback. So I could talk about style guides all day long. I really love the style guides. Are you allowed to write with your personal writing style when working for a company? Melody asked that question. When you work as an employee for a company, they should have a tone of voice that's defined already. And you should ask what that tone of voice is. And you should ask always the three primary things. Why am I writing this content? Who am I writing the content for? And why and how are they using the content? And if you can answer those questions, then you will know which style guide that you will want to use. I think it's good to use a collection of them until you find out which one fits your needs. I grew up with the Microsoft Manual of Style, and I still rely on it for basic writing tips. So even if you just do the writing tips and tips for all content, so include that and who, and some of the content now, they don't want you to do it. If you use Grammarly, it always wants to remove that, and it'll say, oh, this is not really needed. But maybe it is needed if you're writing for people whose second language or third language is English, if the content you're writing is in English. Include articles such as the, something that I come across all the time is an unclear antecedent. Let's see if I can find that in the Google list. So if I look here in the Google Developer Documentation Style Guide, this is my favorite. Let's see if I come up here. I made my screen so big. So the word that I come across all the time is the word that. And when the word that is not followed by a subject, this is something that always can do it. You know, if you paint the house green, then that is a good thing. Well, what does that refer to? Is that the color green, or is the house the subject of the word that? So the best tip today, if you take it away, is put it down after this or that for clarity. I had an editor at IBM, and she always used to call that the naked this or the naked that. Technically, it's called an unclear antecedent. And if you can avoid having this or that without a subject following it, you'll be a much better writer. You know, if it becomes too clunky, don't do it. But what I usually do is I just try to rewrite the sentence. So if you aren't sure what the noun refers to, then consider rephrasing. And it applies a lot to blogs as well. Let's see, how do you balance writing in different tone of voice for different companies? Please, will it be sent as a PDF? PDF. No, it won't be sent as a PDF. And I'll go back to the other question. Everything you need is right here in this link tree. And that link tree is all you will need. And save the planet and just look at it on your computer if you can. And let's go back to my next question. How do you balance writing in different tone of voice? Again, you find out who your audience is and you find out why you're writing it. And for instance, here's Microsoft. They have a brand voice. They want it to be simple and human. Well, we all want every content to be simple and human. And that is one of the things I try to define when I start a new job. Often I'm the first technical writer, like I will be in my next role. And they're like, well, how do we want to have the tone of voice? So you want to just make sure that you always ask very clearly, who am I writing this content for? And that determines it. So that's right. Oluma. Sorry, I don't know how to say so much. Abe, your first name. We have beautiful names. But how do you do it? You just find out who your audience is and you write for that audience. And often they will be able to tell you. And if you take an assignment for a company, let's say you're writing a blog post, go look at your other blog posts and see what those former examples are. And don't be afraid to ask, who am I writing it for? Why are we writing it? What's the purpose of this content? And that will answer many of your questions. Really, I like the way Microsoft has 3 principles. They want to be human. They want to be warm and relaxed, crisp and clear and helpful. So, I mean, that's different than Google, right? So if we come back and we look at Google and then we look at the tone of voice, it's right here, tone and content. They want to be conversational and friendly, but they're not lending a hand. They want you to self-help. That's the difference. So they're writing for a more technical audience than Microsoft is. But these are great questions. And I remember being overwhelmed when I first was learning how to use style guides. But one of my first jobs was at Motorola. We were writing documentation for pagers. Remember pagers? You see them in a lot of old spy movies now. And the pagers, we had to write docs for a little device that only had 12 characters across. And what kind of examples can we use? And how do we do that? But we actually had a giant IEEE big volume that we could look up all ways to talk about the technology. And it was on a giant pedestal in the middle of the room. And there were more than 15 writers. And we would get up out of our seats in our cube and we would go to this giant paper book and we would be required to look up everything. And that way we would be consistent and we knew how to use it. So those are my stories in the background. It really is pretty funny when you think about how much technology has changed and how we can move forward. One of the things that's come up a lot lately is using the chat GPT and artificial intelligence. And often you can get a good start by asking questions, and then you could do your research off of those questions and make sure that you do authentic, really honest work for whatever it is you're writing about. And you'll notice that chat GPT doesn't use the word you, they use the user. And that's something that would be a dead giveaway. So make sure that you always do your work, follow up, and part of it is to make sure that you're writing with the style guide that you would like. And then I see that we have another question with respect to the length of an article. How do we go about determining an article length that suits an audience? That again is based on your assignment. To me, my answer is shorter is better. The less documentation we need, that means the product is easier to use. only write what you want and how you do it. So let's see if we can say like general principles. So if we come in here, length, not sure that there would be any answers in here, but you might find something in content planning. You might find something here. Who is your audience? What do they want to accomplish? What is your business goal for providing the content? These are all important. So Akada, I think I say your name not too terribly. What is your business goal? This would be a question. I always think less is more. I used to think more was better, but don't forget, every time you develop content, you have to provide care and feeding for that content. You have to make sure that it's current, it's accurate, it's appropriate, it's timeless. And the more content you write, then the more content you have to take care of. I call it the care and feeding. You have to give it care and feeding. So all of this, the time and the budget constraints, it's all very relevant to the questions that we've talked about so far. But this is an excellent way. It might apply to some of the questions that you're asking. When you're writing an article or documentation, what is the best practices in making research? Yeah, that's a little out of scope of style guides. For me, I write technical documentation for a specific audience, for a specific purpose. So my ways that I do research are to use the product and to talk to the builders of the product and to join the Discord for the community or the Reddit or whatever are the users of that product, and to find trusted resources for content that's already been approved and published. So I think a lot of you are getting your start with content writing by doing blog articles, and I have to say I'm consistently and constantly amazed at the quality of the content that you write on subjects that are unfamiliar to you. So a lot of kudos to you there. Let's see what other questions that we have. Here's my developer content. Really, you can see when an article is updated in the Microsoft Style Guide. These are all excellent resources for you. But style guides always are something that hopefully you don't have to make one for yourself. And then I'll just review what we talked about. So in this digital garden, there's a lot of resources here. We talked about Write the Docs. We talked about the TechCom resources in GitHub, which is where you'll find the style guide collection that we talked about here. And the style guide, there's a lot of different style guides. And you'll see that GitLab, they have a great style guide too. Red Hat, somebody in the Write the Docs community just joined Red Hat. The Splunk style guide, they have a lot of them. What goes in them, what they can cover. I think we should all think about having a diversity style guide. This is a new focus. Things that are coming out. And what does that mean? And do we want to use the word baby boom? And what does that refer to? There's all kinds of things we don't even know to wonder about until you have it. There's a tool that can help you catch it, consider it, or insensitive writing. There's a guide to inclusive language and vocabulary. This is pretty important because, like we talked about, whitelist and allow list. And it just reminds us that language is one of the most powerful tools that we have as humans. So I'm glad that you're all here learning together with me, especially for many of you, it's Friday night. So I just really am honored to spend this time with you. But being able to be curious and find the answers to the questions that you're asking, mostly it just is having an awareness of what is out there and being able to do the right search for them. And so here's the collection of style guides. We talked about that. And here's where it is. So I think that pretty much gives us a full set of resources for the style guide topic. Was there questions that you wanted to ask that you didn't? I know somebody has a question.
So hi guys, if you have any question, just raise your hand and you go ahead and speak it.
And the link to your GitHub, absolutely. And mine is just like anybody else's. And here's a link to all of my links. And something that I do that I like that helps me keep track of things is in my LinkedIn, I actually put a link here, this learn more about me. And this learn more about me in my LinkedIn is actually my link tree. So that's something else. And in the link tree, here's my GitHub and what I'm working on. And again, I do recommend if you are on GitHub and you do want to work in the open source software, it's really very useful to have a README file. And this will help you be discovered too for things that you're interested in working on. And so that is something that I feel happy about, is knowing how to do that. And if I needed to learn something, how do I make a GitHub README? This is how I learned how. I actually went to their docs and I followed the steps. So if you did want to do that, you could make a README for your own GitHub. And then when somebody says, hey, can I have your GitHub README? When they go to your GitHub, they'll see a little description of yourself and learn more about you. What do you think? Were your questions answered? I see one more question. Our hand raised.
Bimbala has a question.
All right. Good day, Barry. Thank you for the awesome session. So my question is, looking at how writing is, how do you stay fresh with ideas, like in case situations when you like encounter blocks, and how do you prevent like burnout while working on like multiple projects?
Oh, that's a good question. And I would have to ask all of you that question instead of me. My focus has been being an employee for projects for specific companies, and there's always more work than time. And how I stay fresh is I just build relationships with the builders who are building the product, and the product team who's kind of adjusting the sails on the ship and knowing where the product's going. But I also love to be active on Twitter, and I get in on Discord for the space where I am, and you'll see a lot of those questions are here. It's like, how do I do that? I use Slack, I use Telegram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Discord, and just about any tool that makes sense. So when I needed to gather my references for my job search, I actually found one person on Telegram, one on LinkedIn, and two on Slack. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Who are these people? But it's you all who are writing blog posts and doing content for multiple domain areas of expertise. I have so much admiration and respect for you. But do what makes you happy. That's what I do. I like to be inspired by all the people that I work with. There's Blessing, put my LinkedIn. Right, and remember LinkedIn has the link tree, and the link tree has the LinkedIn. So it doesn't hurt to have backlinks.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, the hour went fast. I'm sorry we had audio problems. Thank you for letting me know. I think I should just restart before I talk to all of my friends across the world. I appreciate the time that each of you gave, and I'm really super happy that we were together here today. And especially those of you who it was Friday night. Oh, here I am. I'll just turn on my camera so we can see each other. I really appreciate you. And I really am so happy and proud of Wisdom for doing the technical writing mentorship, and Blessing, you're running the call, and I don't even know all the other things that you do. But for all of you that support each other, that's exactly the right thing to do, is build community, support each other. You can join us on the Write the Docs, and the Slack is free to join. And one more thing on the Write the Docs, if you are interested in learning, I recently realized that Write the Docs has a YouTube, and this one would give you inspiration. And the Write the Docs YouTube, it's free, and all the conferences that have occurred in the past. All right, and you can pick topics that interest you and learn about them. And there are people just like me and you, and they just do a call for proposal, and they're selected, and they do 20-minute talks. They're very short, easy to learn, and it would supplement your wisdom technical writing mentorship.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much, Barry.
Thank you. Continue learning. That's the most fun.
yeah. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you very much.
See you
Bye,
on LinkedIn.
everybody. Bye.
If you have any more questions, you could just drop it on your